Hi everyone, Petrik here. For today's video, it's unfortunately something that's not too positive. It's about 15 series, 15 fantasy and sci-fi series that I won't be reading anytime soon. I don't want to say never because sometimes reading mood will spark, but at the same time, I think the series that I'm going to mention here, considering my immense TBR pile, I don't think I will be reading or reviewing any of this series anytime soon. I won't be continuing with any of them anytime soon, probably for the next 5 years, because if you see my Goodreads profile, you will also see that in my TBR pile, I have more than 400 books. Yeah, that's more than 400 books in my TBR pile, and that's the one that I've already included in my TBR pile, not the one that I haven't included yet. I have to admit that I won't be able to read all the series that I want, and at the same time, I also have to cut some series that, well, maybe I lost interest, or the first book or the second book just didn't click with me. But I want to first let you know that just because this series doesn't click with me, just because maybe I lost interest, doesn't mean that they suck. It's just my opinion. I'm just one person. And please do know that I'm making this video as a way for me to letting you know some series that I won't be continuing, because I really appreciate your recommendation. I truly do. I really appreciate all the comments and recommendation, but I think this is an easy way for me to let you know some series that some of you have recommended, and maybe quite likely that I won't be reading them anytime soon. I won't be continuing with them anytime soon. So yeah, the first series that I want to mention is A Chorus of Dragons by Jenn Lyons. I'm really sorry about this. The first book is The Ruin of Kings. I mean, I really wanted to love this series. There was so much hype towards this debut, and I did read it, and I was so disappointed by it. I think it was unnecessarily convoluted, and I tried the second book. I'm not gonna lie, it's a huge improvement in my opinion over the first book. But since then, considering that this is a 5-book series, and a complex one at that, this series has complex storyline, multiple timelines, a lot of names, a lot of immense world building, but also I personally don't think that it's necessary for the way it's told to be this complicated. The Ruin of Kings uses multiple timelines, and it goes back between timelines back and forth so many times, and I think it ended up disrupting the narrative too much. But as I said, I did enjoy the second book, but unfortunately, I have to say that even though the last book finally will be released within next year, that's an impressive progress, by the way, because the author is releasing this series, the 5-book series, within 3 years. Yeah, within 3 years, and they're big epic fantasy. But I also have to say that I have lost interest in this series. I have just lost interest, even though I really enjoyed the second book. So yeah, I won't be continuing with A Chorus of Dragons anytime soon. And the second series that I want to mention here, and this will surprise a lot of you, but I think it's time for me to admit that I won't be continuing this series anytime soon. It is The Axe of Caine by Matthew Woodring Stouffer. I'm so sorry about this. I truly love the first book. I absolutely love the first book, Heroes Die. I've been talking about it so much that even though I really hate the cover art, I'm really glad that I finally gave this series a chance. The first book in the series, Heroes Die, is so ahead of its time, and in my opinion, it is one of the best first book of a series that I've ever read. It is one of my favorite books of the year, and yeah, The Axe of Caine is one of my priority series to start and finish within this year. Unfortunately, even though I'm incredibly satisfied with reading the first book, and yes, it does work so well as a standalone, but the second book, The Blade of Tyshel, even though it was still good, it's too vastly different. It's so different from Heroes Die that it almost feels like it's not even the same series anymore. And I've heard from a lot of people that this trend continues into the third book and also the fourth book. So I don't know. I just don't think I will be continuing this anytime soon. I'm reading The Blade of Tyshel. I think I read The Blade of Tyshel until 35%, but yeah, I just lost interest in that one, and I don't think I will be continuing this anytime soon. But never say never. I still have the entire series on my TBR pile, and maybe someday, maybe, who knows, maybe one day I decide to reread Heroes Die, and I will have the motivation to actually continue with the series again, maybe. But either way, I still absolutely recommend Heroes Die to you and every one of you. It is an amazing book, and as I said, it works absolutely well as a standalone novel. Then the next series that I want to mention here, and I think this is a bit controversial, it is Malazan Empire by Ian Esslemont. So, as some of you may know already, Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson is one of my favorite series of all time. I think when it comes to epic fantasy, especially when it comes to the world building, epic fantasy just doesn't get more epic than that. Erikson has created something truly outstanding with Malazan Book of the Fallen. However, I have to say that everything, well, the two books that I've read from Ian Esslemont so far just didn't click with me in every possible way. Those two are the first two books in Malazan Empire, The Knight of Knives and also Return of the Crimson God. I really want to love this series. The first time I read through Malazan Book of the Fallen, I was fully committed. I was fully committed to actually follow all the reading guide of the series, of the entire series of Malazan Book of the Fallen. And yeah, there is a lot of books in Malazan Book of the Fallen, in Malazan world. The most popular one being the one that's written by Steven Erikson, of course, Malazan Book of the Fallen. But Malazan Empire, it is canon to the world. Yeah, Steven Erikson and Ian Esslemont are creators of the Malazan world, and every book that Erikson and Esslemont wrote belongs in this series. They are canon. Please remember that. But I have tried reading Knight of Knives. I have finished reading Knight of Knives, which is the first book in Malazan Empire. But it was, I'm sorry to say, but it was so bad in my opinion. It's hard. It's really hard to be reading Esslemont's writing after reading through Erikson's writing. And then when I reached Return of the Crimson God, I couldn't finish it. I DNF'd it. I think it's about 25% or 30%. I just couldn't push myself through it anymore. So yeah, I'm sorry, but I don't think I will be reading Malazan Empire anytime soon. And maybe if I do end up reading Malazan Empire, do know that it will be for the sake of completionist. That's it. But I want to say that maybe I will be reading Path to Ascendancy by Ian Esslemont. That's another series in Malazan world someday, maybe, but just not Malazan Empire, because I heard from a lot of readers that Ian Esslemont's his writing has improved a lot in Path to Ascendancy. So yeah, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that that's actually the case. And then the next series I'm going to mention is a duology. Yeah, it is a duology. So imagine, it is two books and I already can't finish the series because I have finished the first book, and it is Sarantine Mosaic or Sarantine Mosaic. I don't know how to pronounce this. Yeah, it's Sarantine Mosaic by Gavriel Caine. So this is a series that's put on my radar because of Nicholas Eames. Nicholas Eames called Lord of Emperors, the second book in Sarantine Mosaic, the best book that he has ever read. That's a huge praise, and I do love Tigana. Tigana is an amazing standalone novel, and despite my feeling towards this and other novels by Gavriel Caine, I still highly recommend Tigana. But you know what? I just can't push myself through reading Gavriel Caine's book anymore. It's not just this series, but I think I only love his writing, but I don't like the story, the characters, everything else that he writes about. It's just so hard for me to connect with them. I DNF'd the Lyons of Arasan, which is considered to be one of his best books. But yeah, I DNF'd it at about, I think, 50% or 60%. And then I also ended up DNFing Under Heaven. I think that one is about 30%. And to make this video simple, I'm just going to say that, yeah, a lot of things that Gavriel Caine put in his books just doesn't work for me, even though I really love his writing style. And then the next series that I want to mention here is Craft Sequence by Max Gladstone. So some of you may probably know about this already. I'm a huge fan of reading an epic urban fantasy. So an urban fantasy that takes place in a fictional world, like the Greenbone Saga by Fonda Lee and also the Divine Cities trilogy by Robert Jackson Bennett. That's two examples. So I'm always on a hunt for that kind of series, and I found a Craft Sequence by Max Gladstone, and this series sounds like everything I'm looking for. Unfortunately, the actual reading experience, even though I like the first book, but I found that his characterizations are incredibly lacking. In the second book, especially. I have read the first two books in the Craft Sequence. I decided to stop reading through it after I finished the second book. But also, there was another one, Empress of Forever. Yeah, I think that's the title. Yeah, that one also just didn't click with me. I couldn't connect with his characterizations at all. I think this is because that, in my opinion, his writings are more focused on inventive world building, and on that part, he achieved it incredibly well. Yeah, his world building are amazing. I loved it so much. But as always, characterizations always matters most to me when it comes to reading novels. And I think on that part, I think Max Gladstone's characterizations, at least the ones that I've read so far, are lacking. So yeah, I won't be reading a Craft Sequence anytime soon. And then the next series that I want to mention here, this is the Traitor Sun Cycle by Miles Cameron. Yeah, oh my god, this one, I did try my best. I did try my best, y'all, but I cannot. I just cannot. There were so many things, probably almost everything in this series just didn't work for me. First, the world in the Red Knight doesn't feel like epic fantasy at all. It feels like historical fiction. It feels like historical fiction, but there is magic in it. I mean, in this series, Christianity exists, and then there is Jesus Christ. There is also, I think, Judas. Yeah, but one of my main issue with the Red Knight and this series is that, well, the world doesn't feel like epic fantasy at all. And I, as a reader, usually looking forward to reading series and books that takes place in a fictional world, and they have to feel like that. But I didn't get that in the Red Knight. Plus, the number of POV characters in the first book is too much. It's simply too much. I mean, the first book of the series, The Red Knight, has more than 20 POVs. I'm not joking, that's a real number. I mean, that's 2 football teams. You can actually write a POV from each of the player if you play a football game now. And it ended up making me feel so disjointed with the characters, even though I really like the way Miles Cameron write battle scenes. That being said, Miles Cameron, or Christian Cameron, do write a lot of books. So yeah, I think his main forte is indeed historical fiction, and I will definitely be reading more of his historical fiction books. But not the Traitor Sun Cycle, unfortunately. I have tried reading it until the second book, and I just couldn't continue anymore. It took too much of my time, and also, well, I feel like I found very little enjoyment in reading the series. So yeah, this one I won't be reading. This one probably I won't be continuing with it. And then the next series here is The Masquerade by Seth Dickinson. The first book is Traitor Baru Cormoran. I think some of you may know about this series. I don't know whether this series is actually popular or not, but I think a lot of people who have read Traitor Baru Cormoran, they really enjoyed it. But for me, I gave this one, I'm sorry, but I give this one 1 star. Everything about it just didn't work for me. The writing felt so dry, and I found the characters impossible to care. I mean, a lot of people felt sad about the ending, but that ending was so predictable from the beginning of the book. And because I couldn't care about the characters, I think I couldn't find the ending to be impactful or emotional at all. I love the cover art, by the way. The cover art is done by Sam Weber, one of my favorite cover artists. That's one of the biggest reasons why I actually want to read The Masquerade. But it's too bad that the Traitor Baru Cormoran just didn't click with me, and I heard that the second book, The Monster Baru Cormoran, a lot of people struggle with it, and those are people who actually love the first book. So yeah, I don't think I will be continuing with this series. And the next series I'm going to mention here will probably come as a surprise to some of you. So this is Arcane Ascension by Andrew Rowe. But I won't say never to this one. I won't say never. I think I will be continuing with this series someday, but this will be a very long time, at least until the series is completed. For those of you who don't know, I really love the first book. Sufficiently Advanced Magic is a great book. It is a progression fantasy just like Cradle by Will White, but this one is also lit RPG. So for those of you who don't know lit RPG, it is a video game in literature. So it is an RPG element, but in a fantasy or sci-fi novel. That's pretty much the short version of it. And as I said, I did love Sufficiently Advanced Magic. I think the coming of age and the magic school was utilized properly, but Andrew Rowe has this tendency to focus way too much on the magic, on the item, and pretty much everything that you found in video games. Like if the main character spot a new item, a new weapon, or a new armor, or maybe they learn about a new magic, there will be a detailed explanation on every one of them, and it is insanely detailed. And I didn't mind this in the first book. Unfortunately, in the second book, it became a bit too much in my opinion. It became too much, and I tried reading the third book and I couldn't finish it. I couldn't finish the third book. It's just too much for me. And yeah, maybe this is because I'm not binge reading the series. That could also be the reason that I have lost the connection with the characters when I started the third book. But I think in general, the over-explanation on every single part of the world building just didn't click with me in Arcane Ascension. But this one, please still give it a try if you found this series to be interesting, because I think this is one of the most highly acclaimed self-published fantasy series. Yeah, definitely still give it a try. But for me, I don't think I will be reading this series anytime soon. But I will still be reading Andrew Rowe's spin-off series. the weapons and wielders. I think that one is really great. And this one, I think, has the potential to be even better than Arcane Ascension. And then the next series I want to mention here, this is a very popular one, I think, among grimdark fantasy fans, and it is Chronicles of the Black Company by Glen. So for those of you who don't know about this series is the one that inspired Steven Erikson to actually write Malazan Book of the Fallen. And I did read this series until I finished the 5th book. Yeah, so that's quite a lot. This is book number 5 out of, I think, 9 books. Yeah, out of 9 available books, I think there will be the 10th book. I think there is a plan for the 10th book someday. I'm not sure whether that's happening or not. It's been a lot of years since then. But you know what? I did try. I tried my best to actually finish 5 books. I think the first 3 books are still worth it. But reading book 4 and book 5, I've come to realize that, well, I couldn't push through it anymore because in general, even though I quite enjoyed, especially the second book is awesome. The second book is so good. Seriously, it is amazing. But generally, I couldn't really click with Glen Cook's writing. I think his writing, as Erikson said, is too terse. And it is difficult for me to connect with the world and the characters. But if you're interested in reading and finding out about grimdark fantasy, I do think that you have to try the series. And if you're a fan of Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson, when you're reading this, you will see a lot of stuff that inspired Erikson. A lot. We only have 5 series left on this list, and the next series that I want to mention here is a very popular one. It is The Locked Tomb, not a trilogy now, it is now a quartet by Tamsyn Muir. So I really like Gideon the Ninth. The first time I read through Gideon the Ninth, I ended up DNFing it, but after hearing from a lot of people that the second half of Gideon the Ninth improved significantly, I ended up giving it a try again, and they're not wrong. It is so good. It is so unique, and whether you like it or not, it is frankly quite unforgettable. Yeah, but the second book, I think it's just, it's too bizarre and it's too complex. I don't know whether complex is actually the right word here or not, but here's the thing with me and reading complex books. So when it comes to reading complex fantasy or complex sci-fi, I think it's very necessary for the final part to be rewarding. The second half, or maybe the final part of the book, will have to be able to make me feel like, now that's why I continued reading. That payoff, that reward is why I continued reading. I didn't get that in Harrow the Ninth, the second book. I didn't get that. The first 80% was absolutely confusing, and even though it all makes sense in the final 20%, I just didn't think it's worth it. I just didn't think it's worth struggling that long to be able to get to the final 20%. The payoff isn't too huge in my opinion. This was originally a trilogy, and I thought, well, if it's a trilogy, I will still read the final book and finish the series, but now it has become a 4-book series, so I don't think I will be reading this series anytime soon. And then the next series I'm going to mention here, this is a very popular one, and I think a lot of you will know about this already, and it is Riftwar Saga by Raymond E. Feist. So I have tried reading Magician. I have actually finished a Magician, but I didn't have any motivation to actually continue with this series. I absolutely love reading Riftwar Empire Trilogy, the one that's written by Raymond E. Feist and Jenny Wirtz. That one, please give that trilogy a read. They are amazing, and I think they stand the test of time. Riftwar Empire Trilogy definitely stand the test of time. However, I think Riftwar Saga and maybe the continuation to Riftwar Saga and Riftwar Empire, maybe, well, I think the writing is a bit outdated for me now. It was really hard for me to connect with all the characters and storyline. And considering that the Riftwar cycle is actually like 40 books, I think, or 30 books, yeah, I don't think I will be continuing with this one. The next series that I'm going to mention here, and again, this is a very popular one, it is Codex Alera by Jim Butcher. I think a lot of you know already that I love Dresden Files. I think it is one of the best urban fantasy series. It is an incredible series. It keeps on getting better with each book. But I won't lie, before I read the Dresden Files, it took me years before I finally decided to read the Dresden Files. Why? That's because of my disappointment with reading Codex Alera. Now, here's the thing. I think Codex Alera is a great series that will fit those who are new to fantasy. Yeah, if you are new to fantasy, I think Codex Alera will fit what you're looking for. But if you have read a lot of adult fantasy books, there are just too many tropes, and Jim Butcher didn't do anything new with them, and the writing just didn't feel as engaging as the one that I've read in the Dresden Files. It just didn't feel that way. I've read Codex Alera until the second book, which is Academ's Fury. Yeah, I think it is Academ's Fury, and the second book is considered by many to be the best of the series, but that one just disappointed me even further. And I did predict a lot of parts. Yeah, I did predict a lot of parts that will happen in the next book. And apparently, what I predicted, even though I haven't read any of the books after the second book, what I predicted apparently ended up being true. Some readers have actually told me, wow, you actually predicted everything already just from reading the first two books. So yeah, but then again, if you're still new to adult fantasy here, I think you should still give Codex Alera a try. It is a very popular series and it is beloved by a lot of people. And then the next series on this list, it is Nightfall Saga, or the continuation to Demon Cycle, to be more precise. Even though Nightfall Saga, the first book is Desert Prince, it's called, well, a spin-off, I couldn't agree with that because this is definitely a direct continuation of the Demon Cycle. And well, I've read the Demon Cycle, even though I felt mixed about the Demon Cycle, I still ended up overall enjoying that series. There were a lot of issues. I had a lot of issues with Demon Cycle, but I think overall the good still overtopped the bad. But this one, the Desert Prince, it just felt like reading a teenage fantasy version of the Demon Cycle. This one really felt like it's a rehash of the plotline in the Demon Cycle. I just didn't get anything new out of it. And again, as I said, there is a lot of parts that feels like it's a YA fantasy. I just don't feel like this is worth continuing. So yeah, I'm not reading this series again anytime soon. And then finally, the last series on this list, and definitely the most popular one, it is the Inheritance Cycle by Paolini. I've read Eragon, and I think this is kind of similar to Codex Alera. I think I would have enjoyed this so much if I've read it as a kid. And although I dislike practically everything in Eragon, I will also have to admit that it is impressive for Paolini to actually finish writing this book at, I think, 15 years old. That's incredible. That's an incredible job. Well done on that. But then again, even though I said that, if you're still new to fantasy, I think this is worth taking a look if you want to. So yeah, that's 15 fantasy and science fantasy series that, well, I won't be continuing anytime soon. So what do you think about this list? Do you spot anything that you love, or maybe you agree with me that they're not worth continuing? If you like any of the series that I just mentioned, that's good. And if you dislike any of the series, well, that's also good. It is your opinion, and this is my opinion. There is no wrong answer, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your support. Bye bye.